Hello, welcome to 8.9 News. I'm Finlo Costain. Navaratnam Partheeban is a farm vet who campaigns to increase diversity in farming and other countryside professions. But recent research by the Wildlife and Countryside Link found that only 20% of children from ethnically diverse backgrounds visit the countryside, which is half the number of children from white families. I asked Partheeban why.
So the big thing about ethnic minorities is knowing that the countryside is open, how to get to the countryside, having access to the countryside and the knowledge of the countryside. So I think with a lot of ethnic minority people, most of them live in the cities, live in towns, and that's all they know. They've never had that exposure or opportunity to go to the countryside. And also, so going to the countryside, normally you either know about it, you know people who've done it, or there's easy access to get it. And I think that's a lot easier for white people to get that. Just seeing the imagery and the history of it, there is a connection with the white people in that way, whereas ethnic minorities, they need to get that. And that's some of the barriers.
Do you feel like that it's almost as if there's a need for a set of rules, or is it about kind of trying to find narratives that place people from ethnic minority backgrounds, within those stories?
Exactly. I think the first thing is ethnic minorities got to feel like they are welcome, that they can go to the countryside, and then there's got to be ways of how do we make the access easier. So are we promoting the countryside in the right spaces? Are ethnic minorities able to see these things? Because I think it's quite easy to keep on promoting the countryside in the same places with the same people. But Open Farm Sunday is an example. For example, Open Farm Sunday is an opportunity for people to get out, go onto farm and see a farm. But ethnic minorities will not know that these things exist or how to do these things. So I think we need to change. We need to change the narrative a bit. We need to change how we're doing it. We need to have some sort of role models, people in the countryside, role models that the ethnic minorities can relate to as well. Because again, a lot of ethnic minorities would have come from a farming background, especially immigrants who have come from other countries. It's not as though they don't know anything about farming or rural life. They do have that. But when they come to this country, they go into safer places where they can relate to more people. And it's about trying to break those barriers and giving those opportunities. And the other thing is, there's a lot of, if you look at people on free school meals, lower income households, a lot of ethnic minorities are in that bracket. So again, transport is a huge barrier, and where are we going to get that access to transport?
Thinking again a little bit about that narrative, that story, and as you say, people who have come in from other countries, immigrants, are often coming from farming or rural backgrounds. But in terms of places that people can visit in the countryside, if I think of a National Trust home, for example, then a lot of the paintings there, of course, are it's representations of white people's histories. How do we deal with that kind of thing, do you think, to make those sorts of spaces more welcoming and more appropriate for people from ethnic minority backgrounds?
Yeah, so exactly. So I think it's about embedding, so making people like them feel part of the story as well. So you talked about National Trust houses, and we talked about colonialism, and a lot of these houses have a lot of treasures that were taken from the British Empire, from other countries, and brought into the UK. A lot of that history is part of the British Empire. Is ethnic minority people are part of the same of British history. So actually, if we start to actually talk about the real history about these places, what they mean, how ethnic minorities contributed to that history, and so if people of minority backgrounds feel like they are part of that as well, then it's going to encourage you to learn about your own history as well. So me going to National Trust House, I'm going to learn something about me, because again, my family, yes, they might have been thousands of miles away, contributed to the history of what they are.
So it's unpacking that history a little bit more, thinking around the story more. Do you think that people of colour are more likely to experience overt racism in the countryside than they are in urban or suburban green spaces?
So I can't talk for everybody, and I can't talk for everybody's experiences. I can only talk really from my experiences or people I've talked to. And also the difference with me a bit is I work in the countryside rather than just visit the countryside. I think there's two different things as well, about working and living. And so I think for me, I've obviously had more overt racism in the countryside, and I think, I think it's just, but the level of racism I think is the same whether it's internal in a city or in the countryside. It's just in the city, it's probably a lot more subtle. is probably a lot more, but again, overt racism does happen in the cities, and there's plenty of reports about it. In the countryside, I think, I have faced overt and I've faced more subtle racism, daily racism. And I think that is a lot of that is due to people not having that exposure to diversity, or having contact with people. I was talking to a farmer the other day, and the first person of color he ever met in his life was when he was 21 and he went to university. So you just think that's 21 years of a lack of having that experience and having that interaction. But once he had gone to university and met people, and he's much more open and he wants to do more. So I think there is a lack of opportunity, but I think there is an opportunity to actually bring people together and do that. But yeah, racism is a problem in the countryside, and rather than denying it, we just need to own it and go, we have got racism, because once you identify a problem, then you solve it. But if we keep saying that we haven't got a problem, then actually it's going to keep us delaying trying to fix what's holding back people coming into the countryside.
And I guess linked to that last question, do you think that much of the racism that people of colour experience in the countryside is deliberate, or rather the result of that inexperience or clumsiness on the part of white people? And frankly, does that distinction actually matter?
So it matters slightly, because I think if people were going to be overtly aggressive and purposeful about their racism, then there's a conversation to, that's one thing we need to deal with, and we have to deal it very differently from the other form, where people use terminology or say things, but they didn't mean it, and actually giving them an opportunity to call something out, to explain something, why something is wrong, or to give an education and give them an opportunity to change, I think is a positive thing to do. So racism is racism. It doesn't matter if it's deliberate. It doesn't matter if it's subtle or whatever you want to call it. Racism is racism, and the impact of racism is what's important. Because again, we can say something if we mean it, or we can say something by accident, but the person who gets that comment, it impacts them equally sometimes. And I think we've got to remember that the impacts are more important than the intent.
Now, as you've said, you spend a lot of time on farms, but do you still feel out of place sometimes in the countryside?
Yeah, no, I do. I do a lot. I think so what I try and find in the countryside is more connections than differences. My passion for the livestock sector, my passion for my job, my passion for rural lifestyles and things like that, and I think that's the most important thing for me. But I can go for weeks on end and not see anybody like me. And I can sometimes go to a conference. I was at an FU conference just yesterday, and I was the only person like me in the audience. And sometimes that can be quite, sometimes it can make you feel a bit out of place. And that's why, I think going forward, we do need to encourage more diversity into the sector. And ultimately, I'm in the sector because of my passions for the job and actually the people as well. When I meet people in the countryside, and they treat me like an equal, and actually we talk about our similarities and our connections more, and I'm being made to feel welcome. Actually, I forget a lot more about my differences, and I think about it less. I think about it more is when I'm made to feel like I'm different. And that's just, and so actually there are more people that make me feel welcome, and hence why I'm still in the sector, that make me not welcome.
So as a society, what can we do to help people of colour feel both more welcome in the countryside itself, but also in countryside professions?
I think we need to build more connection, and more communication and more interaction. I think that's the first thing. And I think sometimes we jump onto, we need to get people from marginalized backgrounds and stick them in the countryside, and they've got to see it. And sometimes that can be quite scary, and it's quite different, and it can be, and it might not be and actually if that experience is negative, you're going to push people further away. And maybe it's the other way, where some of the rural people need to go into the country, into the rural areas, learn a bit more from where these people are coming from. And actually, if you go into a safe space for them and talk about farming and talk about rural areas, and then bring people to that area, maybe that might be a way forward as well. So it's actually, we were working, you think inner city farms might be the best way to bring rural and urban people together. But even green spaces within a city can be areas where a lot of minorities don't feel like they're welcome. And we did a bit of work about how to bring people closer together, even within cities in green spaces, And I think it's the same sort of thing with the countryside. But what we know is, when we talk about connecting people, again, we're all part of the same country and connecting people, but also food, and the way that we talk about food and connecting people with food, it's important that we get this interaction and we get this communication. So, and again, we all eat, and we're all part of it. So, yeah, I think it's about bringing people together in different ways, using the right type of language, right type of role models, right settings, and I think it can happen. But I think it has to be an understanding both ways. So I think rural people got to understand city people, and marginalised people can then be educated more about rural people and rural ways of life.
As you say, there has been quite an emphasis on bringing people from urban areas out into the countryside, but less of an emphasis in the other direction of taking people
Exactly.
from rural areas into urban areas. And is there anything taking place like that? Are you aware of, conferences that bring people together or processes that bring people together in that way, in that direction?
So I think the city farms movement are very keen about that, about it bringing better interaction, diversifying the people that work on those farms. Because again, you know, people love to grow, people love to be on the land. Sometimes the access to get into the countryside and all those other barriers that actually prevent a lot of people, whether you're white or black or brown, to get into the countryside are there. So again, there are lots of programs in a city, London, in Birmingham, and Bristol to increase growing and supporting growing. And there are, Open Farm Sunday, is a potential. I think there's some things that we need to change with that to help diversify that people come on there. And I think some of the agricultural universities and colleges are trying to encourage more people to come and visit them, and so to be a place where then they can learn more about rural places.
Now, you mentioned Leaf Open Farm Sunday, and that's perhaps an obvious opportunity for the private sector to build up more of a diversity strategy. What sort of things did you have in mind in terms of opening up Open Farm Sunday to a broader range of visitors?
With that, I think we need to think about, well, how do we bring, so it has to be a structured sort of visit. And so again, and again, for example, NFU Education are quite good at taking children into these big conferences to expose them to people working in. But I think we've got to think about where these people are coming from, and therefore how are we going to make them feel like they belong, and also how are we going to inspire them, find that connection. So again, with Open Farm Sunday, who are the people on the farm receiving these people? How are we connecting people from inner city backgrounds with what we're going to show them on the farm? So, people from inner city backgrounds, just showing them a cow in a field, it might be great and it might be a great day out, but how do we bring that connection? So again, the milk that you eat and the food that you cook at home, that's all connected, and how we're quite interested in, and also showing how farmers are interested in the people on the farm as well. So it shouldn't be a one way where we need to learn about you, but the way that farmers ask the questions, engage with the people, and again, if we have that two-way conversation, actually that would work. So, but I think it also has to be a proactive approach. So it can't be everyone is welcome and just expect everyone to come. We go, well, we aren't having people from minority ethnic backgrounds, so we have to therefore purposefully put resources and money and go out to those communities and work with those communities to bring them. It could be even low socioeconomic groups. So again, Open Farm Sunday is for people who have a car, who know about farms, and can get onto farm. So, whether they're white, black, whatever, low socioeconomic groups, how do we bring people, working class backgrounds from inner city areas onto farms? And it's about breaking those barriers down and proactively looking at those barriers rather than just saying, our gates are open, therefore there is no barrier. I think if we have that assumption, we're still going to have a lack of diversity of people coming onto our farms.
That was Navaratnam Partheeban from IVC Evidencia. More news on our website, 8.9.com. That's all for now. We're back soon. Thanks for watching.